On January 17, 1955, a message was transmitted that would change naval warfare forever. Underway on nuclear power. 4 simple words that marked a revolution. The USS Nautilus, hull number SSN 571, had begun its first voyage. This was not just another submarine. This was the future of undersea warfare. For the first time in history, a submarine could remain submerged indefinitely. No need to surface for air. No need to recharge batteries every few hours. The Nautilus represented a technological leap, as significant as the Wright brothers' first flight. This is the story of how that revolutionary vessel came to be. To understand the Nautilus, we must first understand the limitations it overcame. Submarines in World War II were not true submarines at all. They were actually submersibles, ships that could dive temporarily. These vessels spent most of their time on the surface, diving only to attack or evade. Diesel engines powered them on the surface, but these engines needed air to operate. Underwater, they switched to electric motors powered by large battery banks. But batteries drained quickly, giving submarines only a few hours of underwater endurance. Submerged speed was painfully slow, rarely exceeding 8 knots. Submarines had to surface frequently to recharge their batteries using diesel engines. This made them vulnerable to aircraft and surface ships. Many submarines were caught on the surface and destroyed during World War II. The German Navy attempted to address these limitations late in the war. They developed the snorkel, a breathing tube that allowed diesel operation while submerged. But the snorkel created a visible wake and limited submarines to shallow depths. The Germans also built advanced submarines with streamlined hulls and larger batteries. The type Varihuyen U-boat could reach 17 knots submerged for short periods, but it still relied on batteries that required frequent recharging. What submarines needed was a power source that didn't require air, something that could operate indefinitely without surfacing. The answer lay in the atom. The atomic age began on December 2, 1942 in Chicago. Enrico Fermi achieved the first controlled nuclear chain reaction. This proved that nuclear fission could be harnessed for practical purposes. The Manhattan Project focused on creating atomic weapons, but some scientists recognized that nuclear energy had peaceful applications. A nuclear reactor could generate heat continuously without requiring air. That heat could produce steam to drive turbines and generate electricity. This was perfect for submarines. The U.S. Navy began exploring nuclear propulsion during World War II. But the technology was still theoretical and unproven. After the war, one man became the driving force behind nuclear submarines. His name was Hyman George Rickover. Rickover was born in Poland in 1900 and immigrated to America as a child. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1922 and became a submarine officer. Rickover was brilliant, driven, and notoriously difficult. He demanded perfection and had little patience for bureaucracy or incompetence. These qualities made him unpopular with many Navy colleagues. But they also made him exactly the person needed to create nuclear submarines. In 1946, Rickover was assigned to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He was part of a Navy team learning about nuclear technology. Rickover immediately grasped the revolutionary potential of nuclear power for submarines. He became obsessed with making it a reality. Rickover returned to Washington, determined to build a nuclear submarine. But he faced enormous obstacles. Many Navy admirals were skeptical of nuclear propulsion. They worried about the cost, complexity, and safety of nuclear reactors. Some believed improving conventional submarines was more practical. The Navy had just won a war with diesel submarines. Why change? Rickover also faced competition from the Air Force. The newly independent Air Force wanted nuclear-powered aircraft. Resources for nuclear research were limited and hotly contested. But Rickover had one crucial advantage: determination that bordered on fanaticism. He worked tirelessly to build support for nuclear submarines. He cultivated relationships with key congressional leaders. He bypassed resistant Navy bureaucrats and went directly to decision-makers. He made enemies, but he also made progress. In 1947, Rickover was placed in charge of the Navy's nuclear propulsion program. He held a parallel position with the Atomic Energy Commission. This dual role gave him unprecedented authority. Rickover could control both the Navy and civilian sides of the nuclear program. He used this power ruthlessly to advance his vision. The technical challenges were immense. No one had ever built a compact nuclear reactor before. Existing reactors were massive installations housed in large buildings. A submarine reactor needed to be small enough to fit inside a submarine hull. It had to be incredibly reliable, operating for months without maintenance. It had to withstand the shock of depth charges and violent maneuvers, and it had to be safe, protecting the crew from radiation. These requirements seemed almost impossible to meet. Rickover approached the problem systematically. He assembled teams of the best engineers and scientists available. He contracted with Westinghouse to design the reactor. General Electric worked on an alternative reactor design as backup. Rickover insisted on redundancy and multiple approaches. If one design failed, another might succeed. The Westinghouse team developed a pressurized water reactor. This design used ordinary water as both coolant and neutron moderator. The water was kept under high pressure to prevent it from boiling. Heat from the reactor core transferred to a secondary water system that produced steam. This steam drove turbines connected to the submarine's propeller. The pressurized water reactor design proved sound and practical, but building it required solving countless engineering problems. Materials had to withstand high temperatures, pressures, and radiation. Pumps had to circulate water reliably without leaking. Control systems had to regulate the nuclear reaction precisely. Shielding had to protect the crew from radiation without adding excessive weight. Every component had to meet Rickover's exacting standards. He rejected anything that was merely good enough. Rickover personally reviewed every aspect of the reactor design. He questioned engineers relentlessly, probing for weaknesses. His interrogations were legendary and feared. Engineers who couldn't justify their decisions were sent back to rework them. Rickover's methods were harsh, but they ensured excellence. He understood that lives would depend on every decision made. A reactor failure at sea could kill the entire crew. There was no margin for error, and Rickover tolerated none. By 1950, the reactor design was mature enough for testing. Rickover decided to build a full-scale prototype on land before installing one in a submarine. This prototype would be housed in a submarine hull section on dry land. It would allow extensive testing without risking a ship or crew. The prototype facility was built in Idaho in the middle of the desert. It was designated the Submarine Thermal Reactor, or STR Mark I. Later it would be renamed S1W, meaning Submarine 1 Westinghouse. Construction began in 1950 and proceeded rapidly. Rickover drove the project with his characteristic intensity. Workers labored around the clock to meet aggressive deadlines. Rickover was always present, inspecting work and demanding corrections. He tolerated no shortcuts or compromises. The prototype reactor went critical on March 30th, 1953. For the first time, a reactor designed for submarine propulsion was operating. The moment was historic. Though few people outside the program knew about it, the entire nuclear submarine project was highly classified. The prototype underwent months of rigorous testing. Engineers simulated every condition the reactor would face at sea. They ran it at maximum power for extended periods. They practiced emergency shutdowns and restart procedures. They deliberately created problems to see how the systems would respond. The testing revealed numerous issues that needed correction, but the fundamental design proved sound. A nuclear reactor could indeed propel a submarine. While the reactor was being developed, the submarine itself was being designed. The Navy contracted with Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut. Electric Boat had decades of experience building submarines, but this submarine would be unlike any they had built before. The hull design was critical. Traditional submarines had deck guns, periscopes, and various protrusions. These created drag and limited underwater speed. But a nuclear submarine would spend almost all its time submerged. It needed a hull optimized for underwater performance, not surface cruising. The designers created a streamlined teardrop shape. The hull was long and smooth with minimal protrusions. The conning tower or sail was streamlined and relatively small. Every surface was designed to minimize drag. The propulsion system was revolutionary. Instead of diesel engines and electric motors, the Nautilus had steam turbines. The reactor heated water to produce steam. Steam drove turbines that turned the propeller through reduction gears. The system could produce continuous power without requiring air. The submarine could theoretically stay submerged for months. The limiting factor would be crew supplies, not power. The Nautilus was enormous by submarine standards of the time. It was 324 feet long, with a beam of 28 feet. It displaced 3,500 tons on the surface and 4,000 tons submerged. This made it larger than most World War II submarines. The size was necessary to accommodate the reactor and its shielding. The crew complement was 13 officers and 92 enlisted men. Living spaces were cramped as on all submarines, but the Nautilus offered some comforts unknown on diesel boats. The reactor generated ample electricity for air conditioning. It could distill unlimited fresh water from seawater. The crew could shower regularly, a luxury on conventional submarines. The submarine carried the standard armament of 6 torpedo tubes, but the real weapon was the submarine's ability to remain hidden indefinitely. A nuclear submarine was virtually undetectable when submerged. It could trail enemy ships without being discovered. It could position itself for attack and wait patiently for the perfect moment. This changed the fundamental nature of submarine warfare. Construction of the Nautilus began on June 14, 1952. President Harry Truman attended the keel-laying ceremony. First Lady Mamie Eisenhower would later christen the submarine. The high-level attention reflected the project's strategic importance. Building the Nautilus presented unique challenges. The reactor compartment required special shielding to protect the crew. Lead and polyethylene barriers surrounded the reactor. Access to the reactor compartment was strictly controlled. Workers had to be trained in radiation safety procedures. Many shipyard workers were initially fearful of the nuclear technology. Rickover insisted on comprehensive training to alleviate these fears. He demanded that everyone working on the submarine understand the technology. Ignorance was not acceptable, regardless of someone's job. The quality control standards were unprecedented. Every weld was inspected and tested. Every component was documented and traceable. Rickover personally reviewed progress and frequently visited the shipyard. He would inspect work and question workers about their procedures. Anyone who couldn't explain their work to Rickover's satisfaction was retrained. This created a culture of excellence at Electric Boat. Workers took pride in meeting Rickover's demanding standards. They knew they were building something historic. The Nautilus was launched on January 21, 1954. Thousands of people attended the ceremony at Electric Boat's shipyard. Mamie Eisenhower broke the traditional bottle of champagne against the hull. The submarine slid into the Thames River to tremendous applause. But launching was just the beginning. Months of fitting out and testing lay ahead. The reactor had to be installed and made operational. All systems had to be tested and proven reliable. The crew had to be trained on the revolutionary new submarine. Commander Eugene Wilkinson was selected to be the Nautilus's first commanding officer. Wilkinson was an experienced submarine officer and Annapolis graduate. He had been handpicked by Rickover and trained on the Idaho prototype. Wilkinson understood that he was making history. The Nautilus crew was carefully selected from volunteers. Every man had to meet rigorous standards and pass Rickover's personal interview. These interviews were notorious for their intensity. Rickover would grill candidates on technical knowledge and personal character. He asked unexpected questions to see how people thought under pressure. Many qualified officers were rejected, for reasons only Rickover understood. But those who passed knew they had earned their place. The crew trained extensively before the submarine went to sea. They studied reactor operations, damage control, and emergency procedures. They practiced endlessly until every action became automatic. Rickover insisted that the crew understand not just what to do, but why. Rote memorization was insufficient. Every crew member had to comprehend the principles behind their duties. The reactor was brought critical for the first time in December 1954. This was done pierside with extensive safety precautions. Monitors checked constantly for any radiation leaks. The reactor performed perfectly, generating steam as designed. The turbines spun smoothly, and the propeller turned. Everything worked as predicted by years of calculations and testing. On January 17, 1955, the moment of truth arrived. The Nautilus would make its first voyage under nuclear power. Commander Wilkinson gave the order to take in all lines. The submarine moved away from the pier under its own power. At 11 a.m., Wilkinson sent the historic message. Underway on nuclear power. Those 4 words announced a new era in naval warfare. The Nautilus proceeded out to sea for its initial sea trials. The submarine performed magnificently. It accelerated smoothly and reached speeds that astonished observers. Submerged, the Nautilus could exceed 20 knots. This was faster than most surface ships and more than double the speed of diesel submarines. And it could maintain this speed indefinitely. The submarine could dive deeper and maneuver more aggressively than conventional boats. Its power-to-weight ratio was far superior. During those first trials, the Nautilus remained submerged for days. No diesel submarine could have matched this endurance. The crew needed to surface only because they ran out of fresh food. The reactor still had ample fuel remaining. The success of these trials exceeded even optimistic predictions. The Nautilus had proven that nuclear submarines were not just feasible, but superior. News of the Nautilus spread quickly through naval circles worldwide. Other nations realized that submarine warfare had been revolutionized. The Soviet Union was particularly alarmed by the development. They accelerated their own nuclear submarine programs in response. The nuclear submarine became a crucial element of Cold War naval strategy. In May 1955, the Nautilus set an endurance record. It traveled 1,281 miles completely submerged in less than 90 hours. This shattered all previous submarine endurance records. A conventional submarine would have needed to surface dozens of times for that journey. The Nautilus covered the distance without surfacing once. The submarine demonstrated capabilities that seemed almost magical. It could travel from New York to Europe without ever breaking the surface. It could cross entire oceans completely hidden beneath the waves. Enemy forces would have no way to detect or track it. This invisibility gave nuclear submarines enormous strategic value. The Nautilus underwent extensive testing throughout 1955 and 1956. The Navy wanted to understand every capability and limitation. The submarine participated in exercises with surface ships and aircraft. These exercises demonstrated that conventional anti-submarine warfare tactics were obsolete. Surface ships simply couldn't find or catch the Nautilus. Aircraft dropped sonobuoys that detected nothing. The submarine could position itself for attack and escape before counterattack. The Navy realized it needed entirely new tactics and sensors to counter nuclear submarines. This sparked development of improved sonar, helicopters, and submarine hunting submarines. The arms race in underwater warfare had begun. The Nautilus also tested operations in Arctic waters. The Arctic Ocean was strategically important during the Cold War. It offered the shortest route for submarine transit between the US and Soviet Union. But the Arctic was covered by thick ice that made surface navigation impossible. Conventional submarines couldn't operate there because they needed to surface regularly. The Nautilus, however, could travel beneath the ice indefinitely. In August 1957, the Nautilus made its first voyage into the Arctic ice pack. The submarine navigated carefully through the underwater terrain. Sonar revealed the underside of the ice above them. Some ice keels extended hundreds of feet below the surface. The submarine had to maneuver carefully to avoid collisions. This voyage proved that submarines could operate in the Arctic. But navigating under the ice presented unique challenges. Traditional navigation methods didn't work under the polar ice cap. Compasses became unreliable near the magnetic pole. Radio communication was impossible while submerged under ice. The submarine was completely on its own, isolated from the outside world. Despite these challenges, Commander Anderson and his crew were determined. William Anderson had taken command of Nautilus in 1957. He was an ambitious officer who dreamed of taking the submarine to the North Pole. No ship had ever reached the pole by traveling beneath the ice. Surface expeditions had reached the pole, but at great cost and danger. A submarine transit would be a historic first and demonstrate American technological supremacy. Anderson proposed the mission to Navy leadership. After much discussion, the mission was approved. It was designated Operation Sunshine and classified top secret. In June 1958, the Nautilus departed Pearl Harbor for the Arctic. The submarine traveled north through the Bering Strait. This shallow, narrow passage was treacherous for submerged submarines. The Nautilus had to navigate carefully to avoid running aground. Once through the strait, the submarine entered the Arctic Ocean proper. The crew could see ice through the periscope, extending in all directions. They submerged deeper and began their historic journey. Navigation relied on a combination of dead reckoning and inertial systems. The crew carefully tracked their position using speed and course data. Any error could leave them lost beneath the ice. The tension aboard was palpable as they approached the pole. On August 3, 1958, at 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time, the moment arrived. The Nautilus passed directly beneath the North Pole. Commander Anderson announced to the crew over the intercom, "For the world, our country, and the Navy, the North Pole." The crew erupted in cheers and celebration. They had accomplished something no one had ever done before. The Nautilus had crossed beneath the Arctic ice cap from the Pacific to the Atlantic. The voyage covered 1,830 miles and took 96 hours. The submarine never surfaced during the entire journey under the ice. When the Nautilus emerged from under the ice near Greenland, Anderson sent a coded message to Navy headquarters, "Nautilus 90 North," indicating they had reached the pole. The achievement remained classified for several days. On August 8th, President Eisenhower announced it to the world. The news created a sensation internationally. The Nautilus and its crew became instant heroes. Commander Anderson was awarded the Legion of Merit by the President. The entire crew received commendations for their historic achievement. A special presidential unit citation was created for the submarine. The Nautilus became a symbol of American technological prowess. The polar transit demonstrated capabilities that stunned the world. It showed that submarines could operate anywhere, even in the most hostile environments. The strategic implications were profound. Submarines could now use the Arctic as a transit route and operating area. They could position themselves for attacks from directions previously impossible. The Soviet Union had to defend an entirely new approach to their homeland. The polar transit also had scientific value. The Nautilus gathered data on the Arctic Ocean that had never been collected before. Measurements of ice thickness, water temperature, and ocean currents were recorded. This information contributed to understanding of polar oceanography. The success of the Nautilus accelerated nuclear submarine construction. The Navy ordered additional nuclear submarines as quickly as possible. USS Seawolf, with a different reactor design, was already in service. USS Skate became the third nuclear submarine commissioned in 1957. More submarines followed in rapid succession. The Skipjack class introduced an improved hull design in 1959. These submarines had the teardrop hull originally developed for diesel boats. Combined with nuclear power, they achieved speeds exceeding 30 knots submerged. Each new class incorporated lessons learned from earlier submarines. The submarines became quieter, faster, and more capable. By the early 1960s, the U.S. Navy had dozens of nuclear submarines. The Nautilus, while historic, was already being surpassed by newer designs. But its pioneering role could never be diminished. The development of ballistic missile submarines added a new dimension. USS George Washington was commissioned in 1959 carrying Polaris missiles. These submarines could launch nuclear-armed missiles while submerged. They became a crucial component of America's nuclear deterrent. Ballistic missile submarines were nearly impossible to find and destroy. They ensured that America could retaliate even after a surprise nuclear attack. This capability helped maintain strategic stability during the Cold War. The Nautilus itself continued in active service for many years. It deployed to the Mediterranean and participated in NATO exercises. The submarine served as a test platform for new technologies and tactics. It trained countless officers and crew members in nuclear submarine operations. Many of the Navy's future submarine commanders served aboard Nautilus. The submarine became known as the ship that changed the world. This was no exaggeration. The Nautilus had fundamentally altered naval warfare and global strategy. In 1966, the Nautilus underwent a major overhaul and refueling. The reactor core was replaced, giving the submarine many more years of service. This refueling demonstrated another advantage of nuclear power. A submarine could operate for years between reactor refuelings. Conventional submarines required constant fuel replenishment. The economic and operational advantages of nuclear power were clear. By the 1970s, the Nautilus was showing its age. Newer submarines had better sensors, quieter machinery, and improved performance. The Navy began considering what to do with the historic vessel. Some suggested continuing to operate it as a training platform. Others argued it should be preserved as a museum. The Nautilus was simply too important to scrap. On March 3, 1980, the Nautilus was decommissioned after 25 years of service. The ceremony was held at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. Many veterans of the submarine attended to honor their old ship. The Nautilus had logged over 500,000 miles during its career. It had circumnavigated the globe and visited countless ports. The submarine had performed flawlessly and never experienced a serious accident. This safety record was a testament to Rickover's uncompromising standards. The Navy decided to preserve Nautilus as a museum and memorial. The submarine was towed to Groton, Connecticut, where it had been built. The Submarine Force Library and Museum would become its permanent home. Extensive work was needed to prepare the submarine for public display. The nuclear fuel was removed, and the reactor compartment was sealed. Interior spaces were restored to their appearance during the 1950s. Exhibits were created to explain the submarine's history and technology. On April 11, 1986, the Nautilus opened to the public. It was designated a National Historic Landmark. Since then, millions of visitors have toured the submarine. People can walk through the control room where historic decisions were made. They can see the cramped crew quarters and tiny galley. They can stand where Commander Anderson stood when the submarine reached the North Pole. The Nautilus helps visitors understand the courage and skill of submariners. It preserves an important chapter of naval and technological history. Admiral Rickover continued to shape the nuclear navy for decades after Nautilus. He remained in charge of naval nuclear propulsion until 1982. This gave him an unprecedented 63 years of active military service. Rickover personally interviewed and approved every nuclear submarine officer. This included future President Jimmy Carter, who served on early nuclear submarines. Rickover's standards and methods became institutionalized in the nuclear navy. The safety culture he created remains in force today. The U.S. Navy's nuclear program has operated for over 65 years without a reactor accident. This perfect safety record is Rickover's lasting legacy. He died in 1986 at age 86, just months after the Nautilus opened as a museum. His funeral was attended by Navy leaders and former crew members from across the decades. Rickover was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The impact of the Nautilus extended far beyond the U.S. Navy. Other nations raced to develop their own nuclear submarines. The Soviet Union launched its first nuclear submarine, K-3 Leninsky Komsomol, in 1958. Britain commissioned HMS Dreadnought, its first nuclear submarine, in 1963. France followed with Le Redoutable in 1971. China launched its first nuclear submarine in 1974. Today, 6 nations operate nuclear-powered submarines. These submarines are the most capable warships ever built. Modern nuclear submarines can dive deeper, run quieter, and stay submerged longer than Nautilus. But they all trace their lineage directly back to that pioneering vessel. The technology that Rickover and his team developed remains fundamentally unchanged. Pressurized water reactors still power most nuclear submarines. The basic principles of nuclear submarine operation are the same as in 1955. What has changed is the sophistication of systems and the scale of capability. Modern submarines carry cruise missiles that can strike targets thousands of miles away. Ballistic missile submarines carry enough nuclear weapons to devastate continents. Attack submarines hunt other submarines with advanced sonar and torpedoes. All of these capabilities were made possible by the Nautilus. The submarine demonstrated that nuclear power could be safely harnessed for propulsion. It proved that submarines could operate as true underwater vessels, and it showed that American engineering could achieve the seemingly impossible. The story of the Nautilus is also a story of vision and determination. Rickover had a clear vision of what nuclear submarines could accomplish. He refused to accept that the obstacles were insurmountable. He drove the project forward through sheer force of will. Thousands of engineers, scientists, and workers contributed to the submarine's creation. Each solved problems that had never been encountered before. They invented new materials, techniques, and technologies. The Nautilus represented a collective achievement of American innovation. The submarine also symbolized American Cold War technological leadership. At a time when the Soviet Union seemed threatening, the Nautilus demonstrated superiority. It showed that democracy and free enterprise could produce better results than communism. The polar transit was a propaganda victory, as well as a technological one. It came at a time when America needed to demonstrate its capabilities. The Soviet Union had launched Sputnik in 1957, shocking Americans. The Nautilus's achievement in 1958 helped restore confidence. For the men who served aboard Nautilus, the experience was transformative. They were pioneers exploring a new frontier of naval warfare. Many went on to distinguished careers in the nuclear submarine force. They became the teachers and leaders of subsequent generations. The culture and traditions they established continue today. Veterans of the Nautilus hold reunions and maintain close bonds. They shared experiences that few others can understand. They were part of something historic and knew it at the time. The technical lessons from Nautilus influenced many other fields. Compact nuclear reactors found applications in surface ships and research stations. The quality control and safety procedures developed by Rickover spread beyond the Navy. Commercial nuclear power adopted many practices from the naval nuclear program. The emphasis on training, documentation, and conservative operation became industry standards. Materials developed for the Nautilus found uses in other demanding applications. The submarine pushed the boundaries of metallurgy, welding, and manufacturing. Solutions to submarine problems often had broader applicability. The Nautilus program demonstrated what focused national effort could achieve. It showed that seemingly impossible goals could be reached with proper resources and leadership. This lesson inspired other ambitious projects, including the space program. Today, the Nautilus remains a powerful symbol and educational resource. School groups tour the submarine and learn about science, engineering, and history. The submarine inspires young people to pursue careers in STEM fields. Veterans bring their families to show them where they served. Foreign naval officers visit to understand the roots of nuclear submarine warfare. The submarine connects past, present, and future. The legacy of the Nautilus extends to the entire nuclear submarine force. The U.S. Navy operates over 70 nuclear submarines today. These include attack submarines, ballistic missile submarines, and guided missile submarines. Together, they form the most capable underwater fleet in the world. Every one of these submarines owes its existence to the Nautilus. The submarine proved the concept and established the foundation. Everything that followed built upon what Nautilus demonstrated. Nuclear submarines have become essential to American naval strategy. They provide unmatched stealth and striking power. They gather intelligence in denied areas where surface ships cannot venture. They protect aircraft carrier battle groups from submarine threats. And ballistic missile submarines ensure nuclear deterrence remains credible. None of this would be possible without the breakthrough represented by Nautilus. The submarine also represents a turning point in the relationship between science and military power. The Manhattan Project had shown that scientific research could create devastating weapons. The Nautilus showed that science could also create capabilities that enhanced security. Nuclear submarines became a stabilizing force during the Cold War. Their invulnerability made nuclear war less likely, not more. Both superpowers knew that submarine-based missiles could not be eliminated by a first strike. This certainty of retaliation helped maintain the uneasy peace. The Nautilus story also highlights the importance of leadership in technological development. Without Rickover's driving force, nuclear submarines might have been delayed by years. The bureaucratic obstacles were real and substantial. Many people doubted that nuclear submarines were feasible or necessary. Rickover overcame this skepticism through persistence and results. He proved the doubters wrong by building submarines that exceeded expectations. His leadership style was controversial and often harsh, but it was effective in achieving extraordinary results. The question of whether such methods are necessary for innovation remains debated. The development of the Nautilus took less than a decade from concept to reality. This seems remarkably fast by today's standards for major weapons systems. Modern submarines take many years to design and build. The speed of the Nautilus program reflected several factors. The Cold War created urgency and loosened budget constraints. Rickover's authority allowed rapid decision-making without endless reviews. The team was willing to take calculated risks that might not be acceptable today, and the goal was clear: build a nuclear submarine that works. There was less emphasis on optimizing every detail. The Nautilus was designed to prove feasibility, not to be the ultimate submarine. This pragmatic approach enabled rapid progress. The submarine's success validated the approach and enabled more sophisticated designs. Looking back from the 21st century, the Nautilus seems almost primitive. It lacked many technologies we now take for granted. It had no computers, only analog instruments and mechanical calculators. Navigation relied on manual plotting and dead reckoning. Communication equipment was basic compared to modern systems. The sonar, while advanced for its time, was crude by today's standards. Yet the Nautilus accomplished things that seemed impossible in its era. It demonstrated principles that remain valid today. A submarine with unlimited underwater endurance changes the nature of naval warfare. This insight, proven by the Nautilus, guides submarine design to this day. The environmental aspects of nuclear submarines have been controversial. Concerns about radioactive waste and potential accidents are legitimate. However, the U.S. Navy's safety record with nuclear propulsion is remarkable. In over 6,000 reactor years of operation, there has never been a reactor accident. No crew member has been harmed by radiation from naval reactors. This record reflects the conservative, safety-focused culture Rickover established. The environmental impact of nuclear submarines is actually lower than diesel submarines in many ways. They produce no air pollution during operation. They require refueling only every few decades rather than constantly. The radioactive waste they produce is carefully managed and contained. The Nautilus program also advanced understanding of human factors in extreme environments. Crew members lived in isolation underwater for extended periods. They worked in confined spaces with limited privacy. The psychological challenges were significant and had to be addressed. The Navy developed selection criteria and training to prepare people for submarine duty. This research contributed to understanding of how humans adapt to isolation. It informed later programs including space exploration. Astronauts face similar challenges of isolation in confined spaces. Lessons from submarine operations helped prepare them. The international impact of the Nautilus extended beyond just inspiring other nuclear programs. It changed how navies thought about underwater warfare. Anti-submarine warfare became a top priority for major naval powers. New sensors, weapons, and tactics were developed to counter nuclear submarines. Submarine warfare became a complex game of hide-and-seek. Nuclear submarines hunted other submarines in the ocean depths. Surface ships and aircraft tried to locate and track submarines. This underwater dimension of the Cold War was largely invisible to the public, but it was critically important to the strategic balance. The Nautilus marked the beginning of this new era of submarine warfare. For historians of technology, the Nautilus represents a classic case study. It shows how military needs can drive rapid technological innovation. It demonstrates the importance of systems integration and testing. It illustrates how one breakthrough enables many subsequent advances, and it highlights the critical role of determined leadership. The Nautilus story contains elements that recur in many innovation narratives. Initial skepticism from established experts and authorities, a visionary leader who refuses to accept conventional wisdom, technical challenges that seem insurmountable but are overcome, success that exceeds even optimistic predictions, and rapid follow-on development building on the initial breakthrough. These patterns appear in many transformative technologies. As we reflect on the Nautilus today, several themes emerge. First, the importance of vision and determination in achieving difficult goals. Rickover saw what nuclear submarines could accomplish and made it happen. Second, the value of rigorous standards and testing. The safety and reliability of naval nuclear power stems from uncompromising quality control. Third, the power of focused national effort when properly led and resourced. The Nautilus program mobilized industry, government, and academia effectively. Fourth, the importance of testing and proving concepts before full deployment. The Idaho prototype reduced risk and enabled rapid progress. And finally, the enduring impact of breakthrough technologies. The Nautilus changed naval warfare permanently and irreversibly. The submarine's influence continues to shape events 70 years after its launch. Naval forces around the world still grapple with the implications of nuclear submarines. The strategic calculations of nuclear deterrence depend on submarine capabilities, and the technological challenges of submarine warfare continue to drive innovation. The Nautilus opened a door that can never be closed. It showed what was possible, and naval warfare was never the same. Today, as visitors walk through the Nautilus at Groton, they walk through history. They stand in spaces where pioneers worked and lived. They see the instruments and controls that seemed so advanced in 1955. They imagine what it was like to dive beneath the Arctic ice. The submarine connects them to an era of innovation and achievement. It reminds them that great things can be accomplished with vision and effort. The story of the Nautilus is ultimately a human story. It's about people who dared to attempt something unprecedented. Engineers who solved problems no one had faced before. Sailors who ventured into unknown depths with courage and skill. Leaders who had the vision to see beyond current limitations. Together, they created something that changed the world. The USS Nautilus, SSN 571, the world's first nuclear-powered submarine, launched in 1954. It revolutionized undersea warfare. It proved that submarines could truly become underwater vessels. It crossed beneath the North Pole and opened the Arctic to submarine operations. It established standards of excellence that continue today. And it demonstrated American technological leadership at a critical moment in history. The Nautilus was more than a submarine. It was a testament to human ingenuity and determination. It was proof that seemingly impossible goals could be achieved. And it was the beginning of a new chapter in naval warfare. A chapter that continues to be written today in the silent depths of the world's oceans, where nuclear submarines patrol unseen, all descendants of that first revolutionary vessel, the USS Nautilus, the ship that changed undersea warfare forever.